Hello. So there seem to be a lot of Linux users that doesn't know how UEFI works and how to dual boot on different drives without messing with the bootloaders. I know a lot of people have notebooks and they have only one drive in it, and they dual boot on that one single drive. I never ever dual boot on a single drive, because when I actually didn't want to run Linux anymore, I removed that partition, but when I did that, Windows wasn't booting anymore. And there was supposed to be some tricks that you supposed to do to get the Windows bootloader to work again, but that never worked for me, so I ended up with reinstalling Windows completely. And that's why I never ever dual boot Windows and Linux on the same drive again. So I thought I would show you a little bit how actually UEFI handled the dual boot. So first thing I actually do is to go to the boot here, and you got the thing called CSM, or Compatibility Support Module. And I guess a lot of Linux users, they go in here and they change this from UEFI to Legacy only, because they want to use BIOS, the old BIOS functionality. I never ever do Legacy mode anymore. I only use UEFI. This is the first step to do that. And that lets you actually have, if you have multiple drives and you install different operating system, you get these boot options, which lets you boot to different drives. So right now I just have 2 Windows installations on 2 different drives. I don't run Linux anymore. I got annoyed by it, but let's say that you have Windows on one drive and Linux on one drive, and you can actually select the boot options here. If you click here, you can select which drive to be the default drive. And default drive means that if you don't do anything when the computer starts, it will automatically boot into this drive, into this operating system. So if you have Windows here or Linux on this specific drive, it will load that OS. But what if I will load the secondary operating system? Well, that's on the second drive, on this drive. And what you do is, when the computer starts, you press F8 and you are presented with a boot option, a boot menu, and you can select which drive you want to boot. Simple as that. And well, how do you actually not getting the bootloaders to mess with each other? Well, if you go to the advanced and this PCH storage configuration. So what I do, this is the SATA ports on my computer, and you can see here that you can actually disable them. So if I want to install, let's say, Linux, I disable every single drive except for the drive I want to install. So let's say I want to have Linux on this first drive. I'll leave this as enabled. Then I go down here and disable everyone else, all the other SATA ports. So now all the other drives are disabled. They won't show up in the OS. You know, when you select the drive in Linux, the only drive that will show up is this first one, nothing else. And when I have Linux installed, everything is done, the installation is done and everything, I go back into BIOS and I will actually disable this one, and then I will enable the next drive. And now this drive will be the only drive that show up. And then I install Windows on this one, and when the Windows installation is done, I will enable all the drives again, because I don't want Windows to mess with the Linux bootloader, and I don't want Linux to mess with the Windows bootloader, because I want the UEFI to manage the bootloaders, not Grub or Windows or whatever. Because this way, if I don't want to run Linux anymore, I can just format that drive and Linux or Windows just keeps working as normal. I don't have to do any magic tricks to get it to work again. And of course, over here you select the default drive you want to boot on, and you need to keep track on which one is one. But usually it says, if it's a Windows drive, it says Windows Boot Manager. If it's Ubuntu, it will say Ubuntu. And if you installed Arch, well, you can actually rename that partition yourself when you install UEFI mode. I usually name it Grub. So it will, instead of Windows Boot Manager, it will say Grub. So yeah, here you can actually select your default boot disk, boot drive. And you need to have it set to UEFI here. It doesn't work if you just use legacy mode. It needs to be set to UEFI. And yeah, this might be complicated for some people, but no, it's not that hard. First you just set it to UEFI here. And then you go to advanced and disable all the SATA ports to the drives that you don't want to sort of show up during the installation of the OS. Only enable that drive, that specific drive. And if you don't want to disable the ports over here, you can just unplug the SATA cable from the drive. Easy as that. And when you're all done with that, you just replug the SATA cables. I think it's a bit simpler to just enable or disable the SATA ports. I don't have to open the computer and remove cables and stuff. So, but yeah, it's I just let UEFI boot everything. So if I just do this, and if I don't do anything, it will do the regular check for drives, and Windows boots up. I don't press any keys at all. I just let it boot. Yes, so let's actually just restart. And now I'm actually pressing F8, spamming the F8. You see that it shows up entering boot menu, and you do the drive check and you get this option. And right now I just have two different Windows installations. I do a testing system, so. But otherwise, if you have Windows and Linux, it will say Windows Boot Manager, and the other one will say like Ubuntu or Grub or whatever. So this is actually how I select a different installation. Or if you want to go back into BIOS again. Yeah, very simple. But I guess that's a little bit too hard for Linux users to understand. The Linux users don't seem to understand how this boot things work. So yeah, see you later.